Ever feel like you're just swimming in information? Headline after headline, report after report, and you just wish someone would, I don't know, cut through it all, get to what really matters.
Yeah, find the signal in the noise. Well, that's what we aim to do here.
Exactly. And today, we're taking a deep dive into something incredibly important: access to sanitation. We're looking at this really fascinating research article.
Right. It's titled High-Resolution Spatial Distribution and Estimation of Access to Improved Sanitation in Kenya. Quite a mouthful, but it's groundbreaking stuff.
It really is. So our mission today is to unpack this. We're going to break down how these scientists managed to map sanitation access at this incredibly detailed level.
Down to 100-meter squares, basically. And we'll talk about what those findings actually mean for health, for policy, in places like Kenya.
So you won't just hear that there's a problem. You'll understand where it is and, crucially, who it's affecting most.
And this matters to you listening because sanitation, well, it's not just about toilets, is it? It's tied directly to health, your economic situation, even national development goals. It touches almost everything.
Okay, let's really get into that. Why does sanitation matter so much?
Right.
When we talk about having adequate facilities, what are we preventing?
Well, the obvious one is diarrhea, of course. But it's much broader. Think about things like soil-transmitted parasites, schistosomiasis, trachoma, which can cause blindness, even things affecting nutrition.
Wow. Okay, so it's a cornerstone of public health.
Absolutely. And the global scale is, well, it's huge. We're talking 2.5 billion people lacking what we call improved sanitation.
2.5 billion. That's staggering.
It is. And about 1 billion of those still practice open defecation. Now, in Kenya specifically, the researchers point out something interesting. Money is obviously a constraint.
Sure.
But studies show there's actually a willingness to invest in better facilities, even among the poorest households.
That's really important, isn't it? It suggests it's not just about maybe more about the practical hurdles, cost, infrastructure.
Precisely. And the study highlights this stark divide, this disparity in access based on wealth, which you see in many low-income countries.
And that kind of inequality doesn't just stand alone, right? It holds back progress on bigger goals.
Definitely. It hinders progress towards things like the Millennium Development Goals, those big UN targets on poverty, hunger, disease, and basic services, including sanitation. It's all linked.
So before we dive into how they map this, we need to be clear on terms. What exactly does improved sanitation mean in this context?
Good question. They use the definition from the Joint Monitoring Program, that's WHO and UNICEF. Basically, it means facilities that hygienically separate human excreta from human contact.
Okay, creating a barrier.
Exactly. So that includes things like pit latrines with slabs, ventilated improved pit latrines, VIPs, and flush or poor flush toilets connected to sewers, septic tanks, or even lined pits.
And it included shared facilities, too.
Yes. Importantly, both shared and private facilities counted, as long as they met that basic hygienic standard.
Right. That definition is key. So with that in mind, what were the researchers really trying to figure out? What were their main goals?
They had 3 core aims. First, to really map out the spatial heterogeneity, just meaning how uneven the coverage is across different wealth groups and the whole population. And they wanted to see this at super fine detail.
Like those 100-meter cells you mentioned and county level.
Exactly. Second, they wanted to estimate the actual number of people covered using survey data combined with these high-res population maps. And third, to compare their new detailed estimates with the existing national figures, like the ones from the JMP we just mentioned. See how they stacked up.
Got it. So understand the why, know the questions. Now, the really fascinating part, the how. How did they manage this incredibly detailed mapping? What was the method?
Well, it really hinged on combining the right data. They primarily used 2 sources. First, the Kenya Demographic and Health Surveys, the KDHS, from 2008-2009.
Okay, that's survey data from households.
Right. About 10,000 households across almost 400 clusters, both urban and rural. But here's a key technical point. For confidentiality, the GPS locations of these clusters were shifted.
Just shifted. How much?
Up to 2 kilometers in urban areas, up to 5 kilometers in rural, sometimes even more in a few rural cases. Standard practice, but it causes some challenges later on, as we'll see.
Okay. I can see how that might complicate things. And the population data, where did that come from?
They used something called AfriPop 2010. It's a high-resolution population density map down to that 100-meter level. It's now part of WorldPop and considered, really top tier for this kind of work in Africa.
So combining the household survey details with this granular population map.
That's the foundation.
Okay. And you mentioned they looked at wealth quintiles. How do they define wealth without just saying people with good toilets are wealthy, avoiding that circular logic?
Right, that's crucial. They used a statistical technique, principal components analysis, on assets. Think about things like durable goods the household owns, the type of housing.
But not the toilet type or water source.
Exactly. They excluded sanitation and water to avoid that circularity. This let them group households into 5 wealth quintiles, lowest to highest, based on assets alone. Then they could see how sanitation access varied between those groups.
That's smart. Okay, data assembled, well-defined. What were the cool spatial analysis tools they used to actually map the patterns?
They used a few key techniques. One was looking at excess risk. This basically measures how much higher the risk of lacking improved sanitation is in a specific area compared to the national average.
So identifying the real hot spots of deprivation.
Precisely. Areas where the risk was, say, more than double the average were flagged as having extremely high risk.
Okay, what else?
They also used spatial smoothing. This helps make estimates more reliable, especially where you have only a few households surveyed in a cluster, which was actually quite common. Almost half their clusters had 3 or fewer.
So it sort of borrows strengths from nearby areas.
Kind of, yeah. It assumes nearby places are likely to be somewhat similar, which helps smooth out noise from very small samples. It's based on Tobler's first law of geography: near things are more related.
Makes sense. And you mentioned hot spots and cold spots.
Right, that comes from using local Moran's eye. It's a statistic that identifies significant clusters, so clusters of high coverage, hot spots, and clusters of low coverage, cold spots. It helps visualize the geographical patterns.
And for the final map, the interpolation, they chose something called Empirical Bayesian Kriging. Sounds complex.
It is, but it's considered a very robust method. EBK is an advanced interpolation technique. Think of it like trying to predict rainfall where you don't have a rain gauge. EBK is smarter than just drawing lines between gauges. It considers the surrounding patterns, the uncertainty, to make a more accurate prediction for the unmeasured spots.
And it worked well here.
Yeah, they found it produced the lowest error compared to other methods, meaning the predictions for areas they hadn't directly surveyed were more accurate.
Okay, so they interpolate these coverage rates across the map using EBK. How did they then get to the actual number of people covered?
Right, final step. They took those interpolated coverage maps and adjusted them slightly for time because the survey was 2008-09 and the population data was 2010. They estimated a small growth in coverage during that period.
About 1.2% urban, 0.5% rural, I think.
That's right. Then they multiplied these time-adjusted coverage rates by the high-resolution AfriPop population grid cells.
And how did they define urban versus rural on the map?
Based on population density from the AfriPop data itself, the highest 24% density cells were classed as urban, based on World Bank figures. That multiplication gave them the estimated population with access cell by cell, which they could then sum up.
Wow. That's a pretty sophisticated process from start to finish. Okay, so after all that, what did the maps actually show? What were the big revelations?
Well, the link between wealth and location was visually striking. The wealthiest group, quintile 5, was heavily concentrated in Nairobi and Mombasa.
The 2 biggest cities. Makes sense.
And the poorest group, quintile 1, were mainly found in the north, the west, like western and Nyanza provinces and parts of the coast. It mapped onto the known economic geography pretty clearly.
And did sanitation coverage follow that same pattern?
Absolutely, starkly so. There was a clear, statistically significant jump in sanitation coverage with each step up the wealth ladder.
So the poorest quintile had the worst access.
By far. Quintile 1 had the most clusters falling into that extremely high excess risk category, sometimes facing, 2 to 11 times the national average risk of lacking improved sanitation.
11 times.
Yeah. Whereas the wealthiest group, quintile 5, mostly had low excess risk. The difference was huge.
So where were the actual geographical hot spots of good coverage and cold spots of poor coverage?
The high coverage zones were mainly clustered in and around Nairobi, especially Kiambu County next door, and Mombasa. Also some pockets spreading out from Mombasa.
And the low coverage areas?
Predominantly in the north and west. Particularly areas around Lake Victoria and the southern part of Western Province showed consistently lower coverage.
And you mentioned this idea of a sanitation band. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was a really interesting finding. They identified this continuous band of relatively high coverage, over 50%, stretching across 9 counties in southern Kenya, from Nyandarua down to Kwale on the coast.
And that includes Nairobi and Mombasa.
Right. Nairobi was way up at 94%, Kiambu 66%, Taita Taveta 63%, Mombasa 60%. It really contrasts with the generally lower coverage in places like Nyanza or the northeastern province. It suggests perhaps a corridor of better development or infrastructure.
Fascinating. So pulling it all together, what were the final population estimates for 2010 from this study? How many people had access?
Based on the calculations using the raw survey rates before interpolation, they estimated around 19.88 million people had improved sanitation.
Okay, and how did that break down urban versus rural?
About 6.6 million urban and 13.3 million rural. That translates to an overall coverage rate of about 49.1%, specifically 67% urban coverage and 43.5% rural coverage.
And how did those numbers compare to the established JMP figures from WUDSF for 2010?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. Their estimate for rural coverage, 43.5%, was actually pretty close to the JMP's range of 48-50%.
Okay, so the rural estimate tracked well.
Yes. But their urban estimate, 67%, was quite a bit lower than the JMP's 78-80%.
Any idea why that urban difference was so significant? We touched on the GPS shifting earlier.
That's likely the main culprit, yes. We'll come back to that when we talk limitations. But it suggests the methodology, while powerful, might have specific challenges in dense, complex urban settings due to those confidentiality measures.
Right. Okay, so let's pivot to the takeaways. What does all this detailed mapping and analysis really tell us? What's the big picture insight?
I think the main thing is that this was really the first study to look at sanitation access in Kenya. With this level of detail, broken down by wealth, at both county and even finer scales. It moves way beyond national averages.
And it hammers home that connection between wealth, location, and access to basic services, right?
Absolutely. Wealthier people tended to be in areas with better sanitation, poorer people in areas with worse services. It puts a map to the inequality.
And the granularity matters.
Oh.
You said even within similar wealth groups, there were differences.
Exactly. It showed that even among people with similar socioeconomic status where you lived could make a big difference in your access. This implies that interventions can't be one size fits all.
They need to be tailored.
Right. Tailored not just nationally, but maybe even within counties, targeting specific areas and perhaps specific wealth groups where the need is greatest, especially if resources are tight. This kind of map helps you do that.
Now, no study is perfect. What limitations did the researchers themselves point out?
They were upfront about several things. One was the representativeness of the survey clusters. Fewer were surveyed in the big, sparsely populated northern and eastern regions.
Okay.
Potential biases in who gets sampled within a cluster. And also the ongoing debate about shared toilets. Are they truly improved in practice? This study included them if they met the basic definition, but it's a point of discussion in the sanitation world.
And the elephant in the room, that GPS point shifting, especially for urban areas?
Yes, that was a major challenge they acknowledged. That random shifting or jittering of the urban GPS points likely caused their model to underestimate urban sanitation coverage.
How so?
Well, imagine a survey point from a dense slum gets randomly moved a kilometer or two away, potentially landing in a less dense, maybe even peri-urban area on the population map.
Ah, so you apply the coverage rate from the slum household to a lower population density area.
Exactly. It mismatches the survey data reality with the geographical location used in the model, leading to an undercount of people covered in those dense urban zones.
But the rural estimates were less affected.
Correct. Because rural areas are generally larger and population density is more spread out, the shifting had less impact. Their rural estimates aligned much better with JMP figures, suggesting the method is more robust there.
So despite those challenges, particularly the urban one, what was their final verdict on this approach? Is it useful?
Their conclusion was, yes, overall, this method of interpolating survey data like the DHS, adjusting it for time, and combining it with high-resolution population grids like AfriPop is a feasible and valuable way to estimate sanitation coverage and its spatial distribution, especially for rural areas.
It gives you that crucial geographical insight.
It does. It's a powerful tool for understanding where the needs are most acute and potentially guiding resources more effectively.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we've seen how this kind of cutting-edge spatial analysis can peel back the layers on national statistics and show us the real, on-the-ground geography of something as vital as sanitation.
It pinpoints where communities are being left behind.
It really does. It moves beyond just knowing that there's a problem to knowing precisely where and for whom.
And that allows for much smarter, targeted action.
Which leads to a final thought, doesn't it? If we know with this kind of precision that where you live and how wealthy you are so strongly determine your access to a basic fundamental need like sanitation, well, what's our responsibility? As a global community, how do we ensure that resources aid, government programs are directed with this level of accuracy to reach those who need them most? How do we translate these incredibly detailed maps into genuinely more equitable, more effective strategies on the ground?
Making sure that a safe toilet isn't determined by your address or your bank balance.
Exactly. That's the challenge these insights lay bare, isn't it? Something critical for all of us to think about.